This next exercise is going to be a classic little exercise that we do generally in your first programming course. We are going to write a program that's going to keep asking to the user to enter grades. The grades for this particular application are going to be integer values between 0 and 100, inclusive. And we're going to ask the user to enter a bunch of those grades and display the average, mean value of all those grades as a floating point number. So a couple of things to keep in mind. When we prompt the user to enter the grade, we are going to tell them, enter grade number 1. They're going to type the grade, like for example 70, enter. Then we're going to ask them enter grade number 2. So part of the prompt will have actually the number of the grade. If the user enters something that is out of range, so we're not going to double check that the user if the user enters something that is not of the proper data type. Okay, we're going to have to trust the user on that. They are going to enter int value, but it's possible they enter an int value that's out of range. Or for example, 900 would be out of our range, minus 900 and stuff like that. So if that's the case, we're going to display please enter value in the 0 to 100 range inclusive only. So we display a little error message, and then we re-prompt the user for the same grade. So if we were asking, for example, enter value number 9, enter grade number 9, right? The user enters 900. We're going to display the error message and then go again and ask again for grade number 9. Okay? What else? When do we stop? So we don't have a set number of grades that we're going to read. If we were in that situation, then we would probably use a counter control loop. Instead, here we have a situation where we're going to keep reading data from the user in this case, but it could be from a file, from a database connection, etc. We're going to keep reading data from a source, and we expect the value of that data to be within a certain range, 0 to 100 inclusive. And at some point, we are going to use a special value, a value that is not in the valid range of values that we expect for grades, to mean end of data. So in our case, we're going to use -1. So to sum up, we are going to ask for those int values between 0 and 100 inclusive as grades. We are going to add them up, divide them by the number of values that were correct that we read, and display the average like that. We are going to also handle the case where values are out of the valid range by displaying an error message. But if they are out of the valid range and they are that one specific value -1, then we are not going to display an error message. We are just going to consider that the user is done entering data, and we're going to compute the average of all the grades that he or she entered so far. Okay? So, all right, this is a setup for this little exercise. Like I said, it's a very classic exercise. You can find it in every introduction to programming course almost. What I would recommend you do right now is pause this video, try to solve it on your own, and come back in a few minutes, and we'll tackle this program together. All right. So no cutscene, but here's a few minutes later. So let's go to our code here. So we want to implement this little program. There are many different orders in which we could go about implementing the requirement. Okay, so don't worry if you went in a different order. As long as you end up with the same result at the end, your program is most likely correct, right? You just tackle the different challenges in the assignment in a different order than what I'm going to do here. What I'm going to choose to do here is I'm going to choose to go with a small little feature that I feel comfortable implementing first. That small little feature is enter a grade and display an error message if that grade is not valid. So it's just a small part of the overall thing, okay? But that's the key to programming. You're not going to write the code for the entire assignment in one shot, okay? You are going to instead solve one little subpart of the assignment at a time. So that's exactly what we're doing here. Enter grade number %d, okay? And then I'm going to have the number of the grade. Let's call it G. Why not? That makes sense, okay? The number of the grade is going to be G, so I'll prompt the user to enter the grade number G, and then I'm going to read that grade, scanf, %d, because we're using integers for grades, could modify this whole code to use like doubles, for example. I'll leave it as an exercise if you need a little bit more extra practice. And then I need a variable where I'm going to store the value of the grade. And because I use scanf and I want to store the value inside that variable, I use the ampersand sign in front of the name of the variable. So for this to compile already, I need int g equal 0. We're going to start numbering our grades at 0. We're going to see if we keep that in the future or not. And int grade, the grade being red. Okay, and I initialize to 0. So I am reading one grade here, and I'm going to, what am I going to do? Oh yeah, I said I was going to handle the error message, but before I do that, let me save the file. Just make sure it compiles, even though I'm not going to test it yet. Get rid of those nasty little compilation errors if I introduced any. And then I'm going to use an if statement. So this code, this exercise is going to be pretty much a review of if statement, loops, and all of this together. Okay, everything that should be already given from the prerequisite to this class. Okay, we're going to review it, but in the context of the C programming language. So if grade is greater than 100, so we accept between 0 and 100 inclusive, right? So if grade is greater than 100 or grade is lesser than 0, that's a strict, okay, then I want to display printf enter grades in 0, 100 only. And then I'm going to add something here, -1. So let me go here, printf, and yes, I'm going to have to add those curly braces, -1 to quit. Alright, so two statement. I broke it into two statements just so that it fits on the screen. Because I could have done that in a single printf. So I have two statements here. I'm going to go to the next line here when I display this, and I'm going to go to the next line after I'm done displaying my error message. All right, look good. Okay, so let's test. Let's make sure first it still compiles. All right, and now let's test it. So enter grade number 0. I'm going to say 100. It's a valid grade. Okay. Out, enter grade number 0. 0 is a valid grade. So I didn't pick those numbers randomly. Okay, I could have picked any value like in the validity range. Okay, like 75. That would work as well. But I made sure to pick a value in kind of like in the middle-ish. Okay, 75, like somewhere inside the valid range at least. And then I kept choosing the extreme values of the range as well to test my program, because I know that it should accept everything down to 0. So 0 is the last value it should accept, and it should accept everything up to 100. So 100 should be the last value, the highest value that it should accept, okay? So whenever you have ranges like that and you're trying to test, it's important to test the boundary of your range. So that means that now my next test, so I have already 3 tests here, my next test is going to be 101. That should be rejected. Okay, perfect. And then my next test is going to be -1. That should be rejected. Perfect. And if I have something like, these are like not as necessary, but something that is just bigger than 101, it should still be rejected. Something that is lesser than -1 should still be rejected. Okay. So I have a bunch of tests here that already allowed me to pretty much cover my bases solidly, make sure that this part of my code is working. And you see how I'm testing only this particular feature, okay? I'm just implementing a small part of the requirement, reading one grade and making sure it's in the valid range. And then I'm going to integrate this with more features. I'm going to grow my code organically, okay? But the important thing is that before to add more code to what I think is right, I make sure that I am actually implementing the code correctly. So I'm testing thoroughly, okay? All right, so now that I'm done with this feature, this part of the requirement, I'm going to try to add stuff around it, okay? So what do I want to do? I want to keep reading grade after grade after grade after grade, okay? So that suggests a loop. So I'm going to use a do-while loop. Why do I go with a do-while loop? Because I want to actually read at least one grade. So I want to go through that entire process at least one time before to ask myself whether I should continue looping or not. Okay, so it's do something, and then while the condition is true, keep repeating your loop. So my condition here, what's my condition? Well, my condition is while grade is different than -1. Okay, I keep going. So this is where we're going to start having interesting things. So we read a grade, we say if it's out of range, display an error. And then I say, oh, by the way, if it's -1 here, this is what's going to cause me to actually quit my program. So this is a little annoying because if I enter -1, let me show you exactly what I mean, okay? If I enter -1 to quit, I still get bombarded with an error message. So let's try it. Grade number 1, 100, 0, 75, so these are the valid grade, okay? Grade number 0, sorry, we start counting at 0. And then if I enter something like 101, it tells me, nope, it has to be in the correct range. Okay, fair enough. So I enter 999, has to be in the correct range. -999 has to be in the correct range. -1 has to be in the correct range. Well, wait a minute. No, I want to quit. Okay, so there are different ways we can go about fixing this. Pretty much, I don't want to display my error message if grade is equal to -1. So I could say very simply, I could say if grade is, let's add it here. If grade is different than -1, and so we get a little bit of practice with the different conditional operator, and grade is greater than 100, and grade is lesser than 0. If those three conditions are met, then I display enter the grade only in the range 0, 100. Let's try it out. So I'm going to use the same test harness, okay? Compile, try it out again. So 100, nope. There was a quote there that should not have been there, so we're going to try it again, but without messing the input, okay? So 100, not a single quote 00. 100 is okay. 0 is okay, 75 is okay, and then 101 displays error message, 999 displays error message, -999 displays error message, and what about -1? -1 still displays the error message. So what happened here? Well, what happened here is that my conditional here, not quite what I thought it was doing, okay? It's actually not implementing the logic I thought it was going to implement. So let's try to fix that. Let's try to fix that with parentheses, okay? What I meant to say is really if the grade is different than -1 and the grade is greater than 100 or the grade is lesser than 0, then I want to display the error message. So when I enter -1, okay, that should be false because now this is a Boolean expression that has one condition here, one term, and a logical AND, another term. If the first one is false, remember short-circuit evaluation of conditional expression, it's going to skip actually evaluating the second expression altogether. So let's save this, and let's give it a try. GCC main.c, a.out, enter grade number 0. So I always go through my test harness here, my test suite. Okay, 101, 999, -999, and then -1. There we go. Okay, so that's an example of an iteration of debugging your code, right? At test, I realize that one of my tests fails, does something I don't expect. Okay, so now I'll go back and I fix it until I pass the test. Now I'm satisfied, I'm passing my test. I can move on to adding more feature to the code. All right, so what else do I have that I can add here? Well, let me see. Let me go back to the requirement. We need to read a bunch of grades, okay, until the user types -1. So the first thing in the requirement was that we didn't want to display, enter grade number 0 to start off with. We wanted to display enter grades number 1, then 2, then 3. So I'm going to use G plus 1. So G is going to be the number of grades. And when I read the first grade, that means I have 0 grades so far, but I'm going to increment G plus 1 here, okay? So to display grade number 1. And then what do I need to do? I need to keep doing that and add every time the grade to a sum. So right now I'm just handling one grade, okay? So to handle multiple grades, I need to do this, I need to do all of this, which is pretty much handling the inputting of one grade. And I need to do this while, and then I'm going to say grade is different than -1 for now, and we'll adjust that if we need to, okay? So the idea is keep doing all of this, reading a grade, and then what do I do with that grade? Well, I'm going to use a variable named sum, and I'm going to say sum is equal to sum plus the value that I just read, okay? And then every time I read a grade like that, I'm going to say G is incremented, so that G equals G plus 1 or G plus plus, okay, if you want to use a shorthand notation, and I keep going like that. So we are going to see what happens here, like with this this little -1 here that is tested after I added already in the grade, okay? But let me make the screen a little wider first, so that it's a little easier on the eyes. Let me save this, and let me run this. So grade number 0. So let's go back first and do some what we call regression testing, okay? Did I break what was working before? So right now, to enter grade number 0, it seems to be still detecting all of those error situations, okay? I'm not going to type -1 because I don't want to quit yet. What I want to do now is enter a grade, so 100. And I could have seen that actually if I was paying attention up top here. When I enter 100, I don't go further, okay? I don't go to grade number 1. So what's happening here? Well, let's trace, okay? We could use the debugger, but we can probably solve this just by tracing it like that. And enter grade, so let's say enter grade 0. Actually, you know what? Yes, I know it's even easier than that. I don't need to trace this. I need to recompile this, and it's telling me the variable sum is not declared, which I probably missed if I even try to compile it. And without this, that means I was running the old version of my code, the version of the code that didn't handle multiple grade. So I was not testing the proper version of the code. Let's try again. gcc main.c, Control L, a.out, enter grade number 1. That should have been my first clue, right? So let's start with the ones that are not supposed to work. Error message, and then if I enter something like 100, it's going to accept the grade. But it's still not displaying next enter grade number 2. So we still have some little things to tweak here, okay? But at least we're running and testing the right version of the code, which is always a plus, right? So what are we missing here? We are testing its those condition, okay, and how they work together. So I'm not really satisfied with the fact that I keep testing, grade different than -1, grade different than -1, and then grade different than -1 here again. It's kind of making my code unnecessarily complex. So what could I do? What else could I do? Well, I could try to use a break statement, okay? So let's give it a shot. I'm going to say here, while, and I want an infinite loop. And I'm going to put an infinite loop here as well, okay? It's kind of weird to write an infinite loop. Infinite loops are bad, right? Well, infinite loops are bad, but if you have a way to exit the loop, it's no longer an infinite loop. So in this case here, if grade is different than -1, so if grade equal -1, I want to detect something very easily. Do I need to get out of this loop? Okay? So that's what I did with this if statement, and it's a standalone if statement, no complexity, no multi-term Boolean expression. It just says, if you entered 1, I break out of this loop, and I end up here, okay? And then when you enter -1, Then I sum, do I sum the grade? No, actually, I don't sum the grade. And I don't either increment G by 1. So I say if grade equal -1, here too, I'm going to say break. So I'm modifying my code here just so that the structure is a little simpler, so that I avoid this bug here, this nasty little bug that I have right here. So let's recap. You enter a grade. If it's -1, I detect it immediately, jump out of here. I detect again if it's -1 and jump out of the over loop. Okay. And then here, if it's not -1, then I add it to the sum, the current sum of all the grade, increment the number of grade that I've read by 1, and then I reach the end of the loop, I go back and handle the next grade. As I move to handling the next grade, I increase the number of grade that I've read, so that's going to cause this G plus 1 here to be equal to 2 the next time we go over this loop. What if my grade is not -1? So that means that it's either a valid grade or an invalid grade. So I'm going to detect if I need to display a little error message. If grade is greater than 100 or grade lesser than 0, but we know that it cannot be -1, okay? So it cannot be it can be -2, it can be -3, it can be whatever you want, but it cannot be -1, okay? So I'm going to put that error message in one line here just to make it simpler on the output. If this is a bad grade, then, displays an error message. Else, and I don't need really a curly brace here because I have only one statement. Else, break. Okay? So the idea is, if you give me -1, break. If you give me, so I know you didn't give me -1 because I didn't break out of the loop, okay? So now, if you give me something that is not in the valid range, display an error message, then try again. If you give me something that is in the valid range, break out of the loop. If I break out of the loop, I end up here. If you gave me a -1, well, you really want to exit, so let's get out of this loop as well. Else, add the grade that you just gave me to the sum, increment the number of grades by 1, keep at it again. And at the end, here, I'm going to add this real quick, printf, at the end, the average of grades is, and I'm going to display a floating point number, okay? And I'm going to put, I already have a bifurcation after, I'm just going to do sum divided by G, okay? There we go, close this. All right, so I added a few things. I modified quite a few things actually in one shot, so I should have probably done less in one shot, but yeah, there you go. So let's fix all of those syntax error. This is a leftover from the previous version of the code where I had a larger expression, so I had an extra closing curly brace, and that's going to cause already a lot of problem. So I resolved a few. The true keyword, well, the true keyword is not available by default in C, so we need to do a small include std bool.h. That should help us a little bit along the way. Okay, let's try again. Up. CCC main method. Okay, and now for a double and an int, we have a mismatch here between actually the format specifier here and the data type of this expression. So I want this expression to be a double, right? So I'm going to use typecasting, and I'm going to say I convert sum into a double. I could convert G into a double, but you know that if you divide a double by an integer, the result is still a double, right? You divide an int by a double, or you multiply an int by a double, or a double by an int, and you always end up with a result that is the largest data type, okay? So in that case, that's going to do just fine. Save this. Compile again. Now it's compiling. We're getting somewhere. Run it. So let's test first 999. Error message. Perfect. 999 minus error message. Perfect. We are still on grade number 1. Enter a valid grade. It's been accepted. It's been accepted, and now we're entering grade number 2. Can I still detect out of range values? Yes. For the positive, yes. For the negative. What if I give a grade of 50 for my second grade? And then I don't want a third grade. I'm going to enter -1. Average of the grades is 75. So we have a correct implementation here, and I'm going to let you play with the code and do more thorough tests, okay, if you want. But pretty much we have a good implementation here that is computing the average of a bunch of grades until the user enter -1. The interesting thing about this solution is that, yes, we use two infinite loop. And this is not the only way to solve this, okay? So I don't want you to think that you have to absolutely use the break statement. This is just how I naturally tend to solve those kind of problems. So we have here a bunch of if that are going to allow us to break out of the loop. We have infinite loop. I would suggest that as an extra exercise, you rewrite this, but without using the break statement. It's feasible. It's just going to require you to repeat yourself a little bit more through the code, which I generally don't like. I'm a big proponent of the don't repeat yourself DRY principle in programming. So if I can avoid having the same logic, the same condition repeated like 3 times in my loops, I try to do that. But if you accept, if you think that this is acceptable and you are willing to go with it, then I really encourage you to try to rewrite this code without using the break statement. So just so that you see a different solution. And chances are that for most of you, if you solve this by yourself before to watch your entire video, you didn't use the break statement. So that's another reason for which I want to showcase, how it can be handy sometimes. I can be making the code simpler to read, simpler to trace through and to organize, okay? But then again, it's not necessary. So try to solve this without break and come to office hours if you need a little hand with that, or post on Piazza forums, whatever we are using this semester. And we're going to wrap it up for this video. Thank you again for your attention.